nice to see you all here. In case you don't know me, my name's Delan. I'm the director and founder of the gallery, and acknowledge the First People of Australia. I'm truly thankful for the position we find ourselves today, and I think it's right to give thanks and certainly credit, you know. So I just wanted to start firstly by welcoming Anna and Carlotta to the gallery. Just as a short sort of intro into how this all happened. Obviously we wouldn't be here if it weren't for Paddy Bedford. But just as a little backstory, William Mora was such an influential person to me, and when I was a little lost, I finished at Sotheby's auction house, and I was walking around in circles and wondering what I was going to do with my life. And I thought to myself, if only I had a gallery, and I wish it were in June. And Anna will attest to this, but I literally walked into William's gallery, and he said to me, he said, Delan, we go to Paris every year in June. Why don't you take my gallery for the month of June? And so it was one of those serendipitous kind of moments where you know, things just came together, and you know, I genuinely owe so much to William, and we're now the representative gallery in conjunction with William Mora Galleries to present Paddy Bedford's work. So, and I want to personally welcome Georges from Foundation Opal. They're great friends of ours at the gallery, and we're very thankful for both George and obviously Vanessa, who works with us directly. So over to you guys. It's very short and sweet from me, but hopefully that lays a little bit of the foundation to how this all came about.
Thanks, Delan. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'll follow Delan's sentiment. We do acknowledge the traditional owners of the country that we're on today, the Wiradjuri Woiwurrung from the Kulin Nation. We all acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I will add another layer of Delan's kind of foundation, because this exhibition really started 2 years ago, with us anyway. So we presented an exhibition, I Am the Law, in conjunction with William Mora Galleries. And that exhibition really, and I'd say for myself as working here and learning about Paddy Bedford, I just found that exhibition, working on it when I first worked with Georges, who worked on the catalogue as well and contributed beautiful essays. I found it was an eye-opening experience about Paddy Bedford and who he was and how he really is one of Australia's greatest artists. And it was a wonderful experience to work on that exhibition. And I really find that that exhibition was paintings as well as gouaches. And so Georges, who contributed to that catalogue, as well as Francis Coford and Peter Seidel, co-executives of the estate. And I have to say, it's a real shame that they're not here with us today. Both of them send their apologies. But really, this exhibition, the gouaches, is an extension of that exhibition, and it really is really trying to really heed the wishes of the estate and really contribute to the legacy of Paddy Bedford. So, I mean, there's a lot to say about the gouaches, and I had all these things written down, but what I realised about working at with I Am the Law and with William Mora was the love around Paddy Bedford and how and the support he had around him. William Mora, Francis Coford, Peter Seidel, Tony Oliver, these people like Georges, who I will introduce. Georges knew Paddy Bedford when you first came to Australia. You were doing your PhD at Melbourne University in art history, and Georges knew Paddy Bedford, and you could watch him paint. And so really these insights I find just so interesting. And so I wanted to just ask you, first of all, Georges, we cast our minds back to then, and when you first met Paddy Bedford, would you just like to just talk a little bit about how you met him and your relationship with him?
Well, I met Paddy Bedford through Tony Oliver, and Tony Oliver, at some stage in the late 80s, 90s, at a gallery in Melbourne, and he was actually one of the first ones to present many international artists, including, does this work? Yeah. Okay, including Andy Warhol. So he came from a very high art background, and then somewhere in '97, he came in contact. '97, '98, he came in contact with Freddie Timms, a very famous Gija painter who lived in Turkey Creek, Warman, and. The idea started to found an artist group, an artists collaborative called Gija. So that was founded in 1998, and quite soon it became apparent. So the other painters that were connected to Gija were, of course, Freddie Timms, Rusty Peters, Goody Barrett, Peggy Patrick, and it became quite soon apparent that Paddy Bedford showed an exceptional talent. So he made his very first works in 1998. And 1998, it's also I think it's Robert Thomas passed away in 1998. So Robert Thomas, who was one of the very famous Kimberley painters, and you have no doubt seen work by Robert Thomas here at the Lans, was actually younger than Paddy Bedford, and Paddy Bedford didn't paint until Robert Thomas passed away. I went for the first time up to Cananara, to Turkey Creek in around 2000, and then from that moment onwards, I went almost every year for a month, a couple of months, followed Paddy Bedford very close by. I saw him produce many of the gouaches that you see here around you. And just to talk very briefly just a note about his personality. Paddy Bedford was born in the early 1920s, a couple of years after one of the terrible massacres took place on Bedford Downs, so the place where Paddy Bedford was born. So in his lifetime, he witnessed the worst in people. He witnessed, he came in contact with people that had murdered family of him. He lived at a time, he was a stockman for a large part of his life. He lived at a time that he wasn't acknowledged, that he wasn't even considered a citizen of Australia, that he was put to work in semi-slavery for blankets, tea, and so on. Of course, was in his 40s when the referendum took place, when Aboriginal people were granted citizenship. And what struck me so he has seen the worst in people, but also never, he never took a grudge towards Europeans or anything like that. It's one of the people in my life that I met, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It's one of the few people that I met that had so much love in him. There was an enormous love that was emanating from him, and an enormous generosity. I think that you can, it's perhaps a big step, but perhaps that you can see a little bit of that in the gouaches. But he was a person with an enormous charisma, with an enormous humor, as many First Nations Australians have, and with an enormous love towards people. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely not a big jump at all, and it's actually like a wonderful way of framing actually what what the gouaches are in a way, and so. The gouaches hold a really, really special place in Paddy Bedford's practice. And learning about them and actually having an exhibition that was purely dedicated to the gouaches, that we could, like the challenge of actually, producing a book about, it's not even really a challenge, but thinking about solely the gouaches and as something that is separate to the paintings, but not so separate, but alongside. I feel like it was an opportunity to look at a different side of Paddy Bedford, or not just a different side, but in a different way, and to really understand more about who he was and the love that you speak about. I didn't meet Paddy Bedford, obviously. I've never met him. I have worked with First Nations Australian artists, and when you watch people paint, that's, it really does, share, you see how people paint. You learn a lot about those artists. So I feel like I don't know how he painted, but I can imagine, when we were, researching this and talking to people, the love that he had for people really is something that came through. And one of the exhibitions, the first exhibition that was solely dedicated to the gouaches, was in Sydney at Grand Prix Gallery, and that little catalogue is a wonderful little catalogue, but it's full of quotes from artists and from people in the in the art world, and so many people were talking about his love for people, his compassion, and the joy he had in painting, and so watching an artist paint is so revealing about that artist. So I just wanted to ask you again, Georges, a lot of the images that we have included in this book, which I'll talk about kind of the process or how this book came together, have come from you. So you were there taking these beautiful photos, and you were watching him paint. So, and you say that the gouaches hold a very special place in his practice. Did you just want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think, from the word love going to freedom, would be a good bridge for the gouaches, because what you see in the gouaches is also a sense of freedom. The gouaches, much more than his paintings, his paintings are very earthly. Also, paintings on linen or board are very earthly, not in the least because of the materials that are being used, the natural ochre pigments, the color palette that refers very strongly to the traditional palette of the Kimberley, while his gouaches present, he experiments in his gouaches, and quite remarkably, he didn't give titles to his gouaches, while the paintings on board and linen, there were titles. There were Naningari or dreaming stories connected to it, stories that talked about the country, how the country came into existence, while the gouaches, there is greater artistic freedom. At the same time, he also used the gouaches sometimes as sketches for his later paintings. And of course, the color palette is much more extensive in his gouaches. So, I sat on several occasions with him. I was very privileged to have sat with him. And he enjoyed very, very much painting his gouaches. He quite typically did sometimes 6, 7 at the same time. The table, he was seated on a table, on a chair, so not the typical way of many indigenous artists from remote communities. We sit cross-legged on the ground to make their paintings. But he sat on a table, sometimes smoking a ciggy, and painting as some kind of calligraphy. And the calligraphic aspect we see very well in this series of paintings. You will probably say something about it later. That was until recently undiscovered, because it's not in the catalogue. The gouaches, in that sense, because they are more free, they represent freedom. They say perhaps something more of the character of Paddy Bedford, and in the catalog I read also because, of course, some of the gouaches you have the basic colors that's Mondrian uses and the style. And he was shown at some stage, not as a source of inspiration, but he was shown some work by Mondrian in a catalog. And he looked at it. Of course, he didn't know Mondrian, and he said, "You should come bush with me," because he thought that Mondrian was far more to contrived. You know, Mondrian was that kind of, Puritanist, and who didn't want, who went away from nature rather than going to nature. And Paddy Bedford probably instinctively knew, well, if he would come bush with me, perhaps he would become a little bit more free. So, perhaps you can say something about how this series of gouaches that wasn't shown at the retrospective, the very important retrospective at the MCA.
Yes, so the incredible Museum of Contemporary Art retrospective that was in 2006 and 2007, which travelled, has this wonderful catalogue raisonné in the back, which is so reflective of how Paddy Bedford's practice and his career was so kind of closely managed. Like, it is such a clarity. You can see this work, evolving. It has, series. You can actually see all of this. And when it comes to, it has all of the works there, but there are gouaches that are not in that catalogue raisonné, and that they are here, which is really extraordinary. This wall this wall here, these aren't in the catalogue raisonné. They were painted later, but they were also, they're also very different. They are one line, and one colour, and very different in that way. But as a collective, as a group, you can see how he never really repeated himself. It was almost like, the board or the crescent board just produced this sort of, intimate kind of snapshot of just sort of capturing a single thought. And so there are 15 only of works like this that were left in the estate. And so when we were curating this exhibition as a team, all of the Deland Contemporary team here, we were, working together to put up the show, which actually it sort of came together so beautifully, because that's what's so wonderful about the gouaches too. They have that openness and that freedom. They're very different to the paintings because they're so free. You can play in a way. The curation of them, you sort of participate in the same joy as that he had when he was painting them. So this wall came together. But yes, these aren't in the catalogue raisonné, but they just really do show that very calligraphic, just that capturing that one thought. There are the others that aren't also in the catalogue raisonné. There's these beautiful on black crescent board with the white gouache, which really do stand out because as all of his mark making was so assured, really throughout his career, these works show a real fragility, and they were painted in 2006. And at the time, he was living on Frances Coford's veranda, and that was really his studio. Frances, is not here, but she told me that the new Gija One Studios had just been opened in Wyndham, which was about an hour and a half away, and even though Paddy Bedford was quite elderly, he did want to make that trip to Wyndham. So he did do a few trips, and that's where he produced this series of works. There's only 11 of them, but they're very, very different. You can see the shakiness, and it's like, and then the trip was too hard, and then he no longer went. But having those works as kind of this sort of full stop to his series is incredibly special, and we feel so honoured to be able to show that. So I'll talk about the book because I think this is something with the gouaches, and actually when I did share it with Anna Mortley, who is right here, and thank you, for your insight. It was something Anna said that William loved the gouaches as well, and that the gouaches were something that really, as far as exhibitions of Paddy Bedford, you've got the paintings, which are serious paintings. He's really painting with conviction. He has a real he's painting his mother's country, his father's country, often dealing with very traumatic histories in these very beautifully balanced compositions, and the gouaches were something, sort of alongside that. But the gouaches, really to sort of have a whole exhibition of the gouaches, it's like now in this exhibition, and to actually put together something that's just focusing on the gouaches, they're getting the love and attention that William always felt that they deserved. We feel that they deserve too, because they're not an aside. They're not something that's lesser than the paintings. They actually show something and reveal something about Paddy Bedford, which is actually incredibly extraordinary. And he's so unique as an artist. And really, I mean, I don't know, maybe you'd agree with me, I don't feel like an artist like Paddy Bedford will ever be again. How Gija was, how close-knit the group was around him, how he produced his work. The catalogue raisonné shows how the clarity of his work, the fact that he had almost like a studio practice like a European artist. The gouaches were something that he started here in Melbourne, actually, which is so fitting for this exhibition opening. In '98, in the same year that he started painting, he made a trip to Melbourne with Rusty Peters and Hector Jardin, and with Tony Oliver, they visited a friend in Brunswick when it was a very rainy, cold day, and so to get out of the cold, and they spent some time in Kim Westcott's studio where they were given gouaches and paper, and that's where the Gija suite was produced, and which is at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And so from that time, though, until when the gouaches really came in earnest as part of his practice, there was a bit of a gap. And the gap was really when Gija had, hard work to do. They were actually, almost on a mission, in a way, to produce works that were actually talking about these very difficult histories, these very, very brutal massacres that happen in country. The Jumba massacre, the massacre Jumba, was made public for the first time. There was a lot of the paintings at Ian Potter Centre had Blood on the Spinifex exhibition, which really dealt with these very, very hard histories. And so it was almost like the gouaches, and this is my reading, and I'll hand it over to you to tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the gouaches almost didn't have a place then when this work was being done, because the focus was very much on painting and producing these paintings, and the gouaches, there's a gap. If you look in the catalogue raisonné, there's a couple of years where no gouaches were being made. This is my assumption, but actually I'd like to ask what you think, Georges.
I'm not. Well, no, I'm not exactly sure. But what I know is sitting with the artist himself, that the gouaches were very important for him, and I never had the idea that they were lesser work or lesser material or anything like that. I always thought, and that's what I write in the essay for the book as well, that they were totally part of his oeuvre. And that you cannot disconnect the gouaches, definitely not now, from the rest of his oeuvre. They form one big body of work in which the gouaches play an important role. But just coming back to something that you said about that recognition that Mr. Bedford has now, and it's really to have him here in this gallery, in a New York-style gallery that was for Tony Oliver and for the artists connected to Gija through Tony Oliver. Really, that's what they were looking at to do, to take First Nations Australian artists, not only in Australia, but to show them at the highest possible level internationally, in New York, in Fries London, or and now he has been shown in New York. He will be shown later this year in Fries London. So, which is I think the best acknowledgement that could happen for what to me is one of the greatest artists of the late the late 20th century in Australia. Yeah. So.
That's right. Yes, that's a good plug for Fries London this year. So it's true. we are showing Paddy Bedford at Frieze London, which is a huge, I feel like, it's a huge achievement. We were showing Emily Moiré last year, which, absolutely, like, yes, Emily Moiré, that makes sense, like at Frieze Masters. But then when we were there, and it was like, well, who would be next? I mean, who should be next? And it's like, absolutely Paddy Bedford. There's just, you can just see him there. And so, it's such an honour and such a, we feel so honoured to be able to take his work to Frieze London, and to New York before that as well. So I feel like there's three essays in there. Frances Coford, who was very generous in writing an essay. She also, when I spoke to her, she said, no, I really want to, think about, something different and share some of my photos that I have. And so I feel that it was really important that some of these images that were shown in this book. So the connections that were made, I find quite surprising. So Frances's essay is one of the first essays in the book, and she shared these photos, which at first she actually sent them down by post. They were actual photos of the rehearsals for the massacre Junba. And I didn't really realise, but the Waranganu, the wool stretched over, she sent a lot of photos of this. And so the connections that she made for the book, talking about the gouaches as far as the colours, it's not like it was it's something that's so completely different, because the colours in these objects, these ceremonial objects that are being used in a very, for a ceremonial junba, is actually these like beautiful primary colours, which is like, wow, I didn't even think that. I found that really, really surprising. But also Frances's essay really brought that attention, and a reminder that this history is not that long ago, and so really, and for somebody like Paddy Bedford, who's so intimately connected to this history, and it's also that intergenerational trauma is still existing in the population today, and so there is still, even though the gouaches are their joy and their freedom, and they are incredibly important part of his practice, they are still, linked in this way through, colour, and so and so, Georges, your essay, you do make that amazing, that link about de Stijl and Mondrian, and you do sort of mention that there's an interesting kind of argument, something to be made, or an interesting kind of point to be made about the connection of this. Like if you were to exhibit it or have another exhibition that was sort of, having Western artists and First Nations Australian artists, is this something that, you could possibly explore in this way? Yeah?
Well, definitely. I think that's especially with the work of Paddy Bedford going overseas, going to the art capitals, that it will present opportunities. I hope that people there that don't have a clue, that don't even about Paddy's work, it will be an eye opener for many people, and in the first instance for artists and curators. Of course, it's good if for you guys, for Dylan, if the work sells, which I hope. But from my point of view, it's equally important, if not more important, that curators see it, that artists see it, and that already happened in the past, because I know a number of European artists that met Paddy Bedford when they visited him in Cananara on Frances's veranda, and they immediately understood. They immediately saw we are sitting with a very exceptional artist. So, and I think there are, I don't know whether parallels is the right word, probably not, but I think there are very interesting juxtapositions to be done. And hopefully that will arrive. And I think that Paddy would love it, knowing him, and he would laugh with it. He had an enormous sense of humor, and he also went to many of his openings, not overseas, but which was for him almost the same as going overseas, going to Sydney, going to Melbourne, and so on. And he was present at many of the exhibitions in which his work was shown. And here in Melbourne too, at William Morra Galleries, there was at some stage, I don't recall the year, a Gouache show, and then followed by a lawman's lunch with a number of very high-profile lawyers and PCs. But anyway, I'm moving from the artistic part to the lawyer part. But that's perhaps an interesting point to be made, that there are works with authority too, and that even if the gouaches are less earthly than his paintings on linen or board, they too have an authority. They have there is a certainty in when he draws. He knew, and when sitting with him, and quite often it was not a very by the way, he didn't mind me sitting there and even taking photographs, because we joked and sometimes take a photograph, and he pulled out his tongue and so on. So it was really a joyful interaction. But for him, the way that he painted his gouaches, again, he knew when a gouache was done, when a line was finished. He had instinctively. He knew about composition, color, and
Thank you, Georges. Well, I just we might finish it there, only because there's just so much. We were talking, actually, Georges and I were talking yesterday. We both have just been to, we were in Darwin for the Natsias and seeing a lot of work. And actually, and anyway, we were talking yesterday, and we just had this, talking. So it's kind of like sort of an extension of our conversation that we're having about First Nations Australian art today, and how, and we're, really talking about how Paddy Bedford really is, quite singular in the sort of the trajectory and the scheme of things, like, things like the gouaches, the fact that we have this incredible sort of body of work that does actually lend itself to being to dialogue in a much sort of more expansive way when to connect to other European artists, which was almost this sort of wish as well. So there's something about like this sort of sketchbook and this sort of way of thinking about his practice, which is very different to how many First Nations artists from remote communities think about their work. They'll sit down with a canvas and they'll paint their work, and then that's it. But this is something completely different to that. This is something that was feeding back into his paintings. This is not separate to it, but it is different to that. They're more open, that you can, that they're untitled. So, the story, it's not absent, it is there, but that's not what, each one of these are. Like it was about, the fact that it's actually the medium of gouache, that it sits on top of these crescent boards, like that it actually gave him this feedback that was quite obviously satisfying.
Very important.
It was, yes.
The role of Tony Oliver can't be underestimated that as well, and the fact that and Girouan, that was a platform that nurtured the artist and that indeed had the connections with the broader art world. I think it's a coming together of many. In a moment in time, Girouan doesn't exist anymore, only existed relatively briefly from 1998, and more or less ended with the passing of Paddy in 2006. But during that time, there was an enormous energy that came out of Girouan, with of course Paddy at the forefront, but also the other artists, and the fact that someone from the international artwork from the onset worked with the artist about the good materials that were used, but also with due respect to the artist, and not treating them as secondary or no, but from the onset presenting the artist as very high-profile international artist. That was very, very important, and I think that's definitely a part of the of what's happening now, of the success of Paddy Bedford and the Tier 1 artists.
Thank you, and I do want to thank you for your contribution to the book. Honestly, like I'm so appreciative of your time. You spent so many years thinking about Paddy Bedford and thinking about his work and curating exhibitions of his work. So your contribution is so incredibly important, and also Francis Cofford and Peter Seidel as well, and also and Anna Mortley, and also the designer. I have to say, I have to really do a shout out to the designer, because she really, oh my gosh, she was fabulous in sort of bringing this book together, and also and thanks for your beautiful images as well. And so look, thank you all so much for being here today. There's so much we can talk about the gouaches, but thank you all very much, and thank you.